Hey everybody, we're going to go over the colored pencil techniques you're going to need to complete your final drawings. So these are the things you're going to need. You're going to need your sketchbook, a pencil and eraser. You're going to need a set of color pencils. Doesn't really matter what kind of color pencils, as long as they're colored pencils. A couple of optional things you might want is a set of watercolors, water for the watercolors, paintbrush, and oil. So you could use baby oil. You can also use rubbing alcohol. And some people have said like cooking oil sometimes works. So with this one, if you don't have it, I'll explain that later when I get to it in the video. Okay. So in your sketchbook at the top, you're going to write colored pencil techniques because you will be handing this in as an assignment. Okay. And I drew 7 small squares and put each of the colored pencil techniques we're going to be using next to it. If you want to take a minute and pause this and go ahead and get this situated in your sketchbook, I would. There is a worksheet that's attached on the previous slide showing you an example of each one also. And that way you can also copy the name of each technique. So we're going to practice these one at a time, and you're going to apply these to your final drawing. And people sometimes ask, well, do I have to use all of them? The answer is no. We're just going to practice each one. So I'm actually going to start with the watercolor one. If you do not have watercolors at home, that is okay. I'm not going to require this one to be done. With the watercolor technique, what you're going to do is, even though these are colored pencil techniques, I do this one first because you need this to be dry. So I'm just going to put a light wash down of watercolor so that way it can dry. And we'll come back to this in a little bit. But there we go. So that layer can go ahead and start drying. So the first technique I'm going to talk to you about is burnishing. Burnishing is kind of an interesting technique because what it is it's a very thick layer of colored pencil. So colored pencils are made from wax and similar to crayons, wax and pigments. So you can actually build the layers of color in an area. So right now I have a pretty thin layer of color. I don't have a whole lot. But when you burnish, what you're doing is you're layering over top. So what I can do is I can continue with that same color, or I can take another color and begin to layer over top of it to create a more clear pigment or color. And you can practice that a couple of different times in that little square with different colors. So for example, if I wanted to do all the same, I could just continue to layer on top until I get a consistent flat pigment. So like the trick with burnishing is making sure that it's very smooth. So you're going to notice as you build layers of color, it becomes kind of waxy and thick. And you're going to have less and less white showing. Now, like I said, you could actually do this by mixing colors as well. So if I wanted to, I could actually go in with one color and then take a different color and go over top of it and still build up that waxy, thick, consistent color. So you can play around with this one and actually mix colors together quite a bit. Now, the next one is scraping. This one's a little tricky if you don't have exactly what you need. So for this, you could use a pair of scissors. You could also use a toothpick, something like that as well. And the way I suggest doing it is by putting down a nice thick color in that area. And I'm only going to do half of it because I'm going to try this twice with 2 different sets of color. I'm going to put one color down. And then I'm going to layer another color on top of it. And the nice thing about this is if you put down a light color first and then a dark color over top of it, that's when you're going to get the best results. So I use that light brown, and then I put a black over top. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use the edge of a pair of scissors, and I'm going to scratch away. And you can see, now I can actually see the light brown underneath. Now, the only thing you have to be careful about with this, if you scratch too far, you'll actually go down all the way to the paper. So you want to do it very gently so you can see the color underneath and just that. This is really good if you have an animal that has fur. So if you have an animal that has like different colors of fur, like grays and blacks and like tans and browns, this would look really, really cool for an animal to add some extra texture for that fur. If, say, you were drawing an animal, or if you were drawing a different object like a blanket or something hairy, so you could get that little bit of extra texture to your drawing. And same thing, I'm going to layer the darkest color on top, and then take my little pointed tip, whatever I can find, just be careful, and scratch away. And you could do it in different directions. You could do almost curls, you can have it cross over, it's up to you. Now the next one is my favorite, which is directional lines. What you're going to do is you're going to pick a series of colors. So I'm going to use mostly warm colors for mine. So it could be a couple of different ones. Doesn't have to be anything super, super specific. So what you're going to do is you're going to make strokes of lines that go in the same direction, that just barely touch each other. So they're going to be very close together with little space in between. And you could do them in different directions. So like I'm going to do mine in waves. You could do them straight. It's up to you. And I want to try to fill in the space in between. You don't have to stay inside the boxes, guys. The boxes are just kind of there to help separate. And my goal is to try to cover up all the white on my paper to build that color. And I'm actually going to go in with the yellow now to make it lighter. And the real trick is to make sure there's no white showing from your paper. But remember, it's just strokes, it's lines. It's not going back and forth. All right, now the next one we're going to do is we're actually going to go to scumbling. Scumbling is kind of fun for some people. Some people enjoy it, some people don't. What you're doing is you're actually doing scribbles in these loops. And you're going to build it with different colors. So I'm going to start off with a green. And I'm using these loopy kind of scribbles to start for my first layer. And then I'm going to go in with another color over top of it. And you might want to try to remember a little bit about color. So, for example, greens and yellows will go together well because green is actually made with yellow. So it'll give me some yellows and some light greens, and then I'm going to layer over top of it. And just like with the directional lines, I want to try to get this so there's no white showing from my paper. I might actually mix in a lighter green here too. And there's scumbling. Now, cross-hatching is the next one. This one I think was a lot of fun. So it's kind of like directional lines in that what you're going to do is you're going to make strokes of color that go one direction. And it's okay if they touch a little bit, but you want to keep one color going one way. And then you're going to take a second color and go over top of it in the other direction. And again, this is a really good way to show different texture as well and get some different colors in. Now, these last two, if you don't have the supplies you need for them, don't worry about them. You can just leave them blank. So with the oil one, again, it's best to use like baby oil or rubbing alcohol. But if you don't have those, you could experiment with like some cooking oil in the cabinet, if that's okay. You put down one color, and then you can actually bring in a second color. And the best way to do this is with a Q-tip, but you could use like a cotton ball if you had to, or like a really twisted up piece of paper towel. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my Q-tip. Don't use a used Q-tip, guys. That wouldn't be very good. And then I'm going to get a tiny bit of oil on my Q-tip. And blend my colors together. And it'll actually smooth out a lot of your pigment and actually almost make it look more like paint. But the trick is to use very little at a time and not to reuse your Q-tips too often. And then the last one with watercolor is simply layering over top your watercolor with your colored pencil. So I used blue and I could layer over top with black. And you can do different lines and strokes. So remember to take a picture and attach this to our assignment today.